and say from your personal encounters and conversations, does anyone want to share what they've heard, why they feel that people feel that this just can't be the truth? Hashem can't eat anything. He's perfect. He's the Boyer, we're the Nivra. He's like Zalman was saying, like the argument he got, he has no tzir, there's no Hagbala. You can't say in his essence he has any needs. Does anyone want to start mixing it up here? Feel free. If not, I guess we can just go into more of a discussion.
Well, I can tell you that we've gotten some strongly worded questions on a number of topics, but it all leads to the same idea. Like one guy writes, if there wasn't schar v'einish, and if you're not afraid of going to Gehenna, then why in the world would anyone do any mitzvahs? Is that a problem? Is that an acceptable form of Yiddishkeit? Okay, so let's take a look at this text. I went over this with some of the Bachrim in the family before, but it's such an amazing thing. I can't believe that people don't quote it more often, because it is so central. And if you have a copy of Kayet's Tafshin, the Sichos, you take a look at page 127, it is absolutely amazing. So first of all, there's a Chassidische Parsha. There's the Parsha in the Chumash, and then there's the Chassidische Parsha, the Likutei Torah. I think that there is a Pirkei Avos, and there's a Chassidische Pirkei Avos. The Chassidische Pirkei Avos is Likutei Deburim, because like Pirkei Avos, it is the wisdom of the Rabbeim in an informal, not halachic style, and it illuminates, it lifts you out of the ordinary into something special. So if you don't have a copy, let me just read it. It's only one page, and it's little sections. Listen to the first section of this. The Alter Rebbe says, "Wenn ich bin gewesen ben chomish, when I was 5 years old, habe ich gewusst dem Inyan von Neshames ani asisi." At 5 years old, I knew that the Eibishter says, Neshames ani asisi, there are two kinds of neshames. And those are the shtei nefoshes, v'zene feranen by jeder ben ubas Yisrael. A nefesh alikis and a nefesh habahamis. So at 5 years old, the Alter Rebbe knew that there are two nefoshes, not just a yetzer hara and a yetzer tov, but a nefesh alikis and a nefesh habahamis. Wenn ich, sagt Rabbeinu Hagadol, bin gewesen ben chamish, habe ich gewusst der Minyan von der Neshames ani asisi, die shtei nefoshes, wo seine Feranen bei jedem ben Bas Yisrael, a nefesh alikis and a nefesh habahamis. Point number 2. In jener Zeit habe ich sich stark mishtadel gewesen und gelegt a starke Yegie. A das, was ich weiß, soll ich wissen le'emkei ula shurei. Scroll up a bit. Le'emkei shel davar. So around that time, in other words, when he was 5 years old, he made a great effort and made a strong point of understanding everything he knows, understanding it deeply to the core of the subject. Ich hab dann a Sach getracht, was ist der Unterschied zwischen die zwei Neshames? Es ist doch ein Neshames ani asisi. Seien doch beide was ani asisi. So the Eibishter says, I made two neshames, how can they be very different? And what would the difference between them be? So hat mir genommen a gewisse Zeit, bis Hashem Yisbarach hat erleuchten mein Koyach HaSeichel, als beide, der Nefesh Elikis und der Nefesh HaBahamis, vermogen Keiches Ruchnim, was beleben de Keiches HaNefesh. After a certain amount of time, a gewisse Zeit, which means not years. If it was a different age, he would have said when I was 7, 8, 9. So a gewisse Zeit means still in that same year. The Eibishter enlightened me to realize that a Nefesh Elikis and a Nefesh HaBahamis are both Ruchnis Dike Keiches that give energy to the other Keiches of the Nefesh, which are Seichel u'Mides, Ratzon u'Einig. So what is a Nefesh? A Nefesh is an energy. It's a koyach.
Saying the Nefesh Farmakt. So there's the Nefesh and there's what the Nefesh Farmakt.
Yes, but the Nefesh Farmakt, such a koyach that gives energy to the other functions of the Nefesh. What are the functions of the Nefesh? The Seichel, the Mides, the Ratzon, and the Einig. Nor der Unterschied. So what is the difference between them? Der Unterschied zwischen die zwei Nefeshes is der Nefesh Elikis is sein Farbrengen und Wellen. What is the pleasure and the desire of the Nefesh Elikis? As sein Seichel Verstand und Mides Bager, that his understanding of his intelligence and the desire of his Mides, the longing of his Mides, und Trachten, Reden und Ton, and the three Levushim of Machshava, Dibur, Meise, sollen sein übergegeben zu Limud HaTorah, Kiyum HaMitzvos, und Midas Tevis. So the Nefesh Elikis gives chayas to the keiches of Seichel, Midas, and behavior, and what it wants is that the Seichel and the Midas and the behavior should all be in Torah, Mitzvos, and Midas Tevis. Holy things. The Nefesh HaBahamis, Hagam is a Nefesh Ruchni. Although the Nefesh HaBahamis is also a Nefesh, which means a spiritual thing, doch is sein banem, his grasp and perception is nur in dem körperlichen Gut. The only thing he understands is the physical good, what feels good to the body. Und der weckt alle keiches, he inspires, the Nefesh HaBahamis inspires all the keiches, hein keiches makifin, from Farbrengen und Wellen, the makifim dike keiches of Tainug and Ratzon, und hen keiches pnimim, also the internal keiches, which are Verstand und Mides, and the levushim from Machshava, Dibur, und Meise, als in Gashmias. So you have two complete personalities. The difference between them is that the Nefesh Elikis energizes your Seichel and your Mides and your behavior with godliness, and the Nefesh HaBahamis energizes all your keiches with Gashmias. Okay, still 5 years old. Wenn ich hab tiefer betracht dem Mohus Ruchni von die beiden Neshamis in zeire efane hahishtadlus, I later considered, how do these two neshamis, how do they influence, wirken, how do they have an effect of the mention? They both have an effect that we know. One is ruchnius and one is gashmius, but they both have an effect. The shaila is, how do they have an effect? What is their method? Habe ich es gefunden, sehr Verschiedenartigkeit in seire efane hapeulis. I discovered the difference in the way that they work, what they use to influence the person. The nefesh elikis is offenherzig. The nefesh elikis is honest and straightforward. The nefesh habahamis is a shakran b'muhusei. The nefesh habahamis is a lie at its very core. Unkumt lefates b'chol hamine shkorim, and it tempts you and influences you with its lies and with its fake, false appeal. So, this is point number, 4? The difference in the method. The Nefesh Elikis has no shtick. It says what it says. It tells you that Torah is emes, mitzvahs are emes, you gotta do what's right. That's its appeal. That's the sales pitch. The Nefesh HaBahamis is all a bunch of lies. The whole approach is an approach of sheker. Wenn ich habe es gefunden, der Metzias HaMahus von dem Nefesh HaBahamis, when I discovered that the essence of the Nefesh HaBahamis is fake, untrue, hat mir Hashem Yisbarach geholfen, als soll es gefunden, die Darkei HaHakora. The next step was that the Eibishter helped me to discover how you recognize, how do you identify, wie man soll kennen wissen in jeder Sach von Dvorim HaMutarim, how to be able to know in every permissible act, wo der Mensch hat zu sehr hamshocha und arotzen, anything that is appealing, that is enticing to the human being, you have to be able to identify and recognize von wem kommt die hamshocha. This attraction, who's producing it? Tzi von Nefesh Elikis, tzi von Nefesh HaBahamis. A big challenge, if you have two nefashis and both have the same koiches, they both have tainug, they both have rotzen, they both have seichel, how are you going to know when you're experiencing your nefesh elikis and when are you experiencing your nefesh habahamis? So it's true that the nefesh elikis is open, straightforward, no shtick, and the nefesh habahamis is lying. But how do you know? How are you supposed to tell the difference? Es durch a gewisse Zeit, again, it sounds like it's not even a year, hat Hashem Yisbarach der Leuchten eine Sichli, auf zu verstehen, als voran a Nefesh HaSichlis. I guess on this there's no posuk. That there are two neshamas, there's at least a posuk, neshamas on the OCC. So the Alter Rebbe at 5 years old discovered that there is a nefesh hasichlis. It's not a neshama that becomes a nefesh. It's just a nefesh. Vodel nefesh, balaych dimension, this nefesh hasichlis enlightens you gives you the intelligence, haben a gewisse Hakore in dem Emes von Nefesh Olikis und in der Falschkeit von Nefesh Abahamis. Your intelligence, the Nefesh HaSichlis, has a talent that it can recognize and appreciate the difference between the emes of the Nefesh Alikis and the falseness of the Nefesh Abahamis. And here's the punchline. Und dann, only then, bin ich gewinn sicher, als ich bin gekommen zu der richtigen Derech HaChaim. Then I realized that I had found out the secret of life. "5 years old. Which means that just like in Pirkei Avos, Hu Haya Eimer means that's what he was. The only way that Rebbe could know this at 5 years old is because that's what he was. He was born this way. Mahu Eimer. Hu Haya Eimer. So let's take another look at this. What is the punchline? The punchline is, we know that there are two neshamis. We know that one is a nefesh elikis and one is a nefesh abahamis. We also know that one of them is mitzvahs and one of them is avedas, or gashmias. Then we know that the nefesh elikis is honest and tells you the truth. The nefesh abahamis lies. Now we need to know the Nefesh Elikis is emes, and the Nefesh Abahamis is sheker. Why do we care? So what? For this, you need a Nefesh HaSichlis. So here's the picture of how it turns out. What is Chagas? There's Chabad, Chassidus Chabad, and there's Chassidus Chagas. Chassidus Chagas means midas, emotions. What appeals to the emotions? What appeals to the emotion is good and bad, constructive or destructive, reward and punishment, benefit and cost, beautiful and ugly. These are all appeals to the emotion. The emotions on the level of midas, whether something is emes or not, is not important. Your heart does not react to emes or sheker. That's not the nature of midas. True and false is an issue that affects only the mind. And that's why, because you have a nefesh hasichlis, that's why it does make a difference that the nefesh elikis is emes and the nefesh abahamis is sheker. Because to an intelligent mind, if it's sheker, it is worse than evil. Evil is destructive, it's damaging, it's embarrassing. You have to clean it up afterwards. But sheker is worse. So you can imagine a person who lives his life thinking a certain way, believing that certain things are emes, and then finds out that, nope, it's all false. To an intelligent person, that would be the end of life. That pulls the rug out from a person more than if he finds out that what he was doing was bad rather than good. So that's why in the Chassidus of Chagas, there's a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Tov. And that's the issue. Good or bad, mitzvah or avera, emes and sheker, who cares? What difference does it make? So that's why it was a perfect introduction, what Zalman was saying. What's the difference whether the Eibishter really needs my mitzvah, doesn't really need my mitzvah? Who cares? See, that's if you don't have a nefesh hasichlis. The nefesh hasichlis gives you an appreciation. Emes is emes. There's nothing greater, more real, more valid. And sheker is absolutely worse than sin. Maybe that's why the first two mitzvahs of the Aseres Hadibris is emes and sheker. I am an Eibishter, don't have fake Eibishters. Obviously, these thoughts that the Alter Rebbe had at 5 years old is the beginnings of the basis of Tanya. Not only that there are two nefashis, but like in Perek Yudalid, the Alter Rebbe says that the reason a Beinani doesn't do an Avera, even when he's tempted, is because it's not true. In other words, the difference and the appreciation between emes and sheker actually affects your behavior. The reason you say no to a Yetzer Hara or to a Nefesh HaBahamis is because you're lying. You're telling me that it's okay, you're telling me it's good, you're telling me it's helpful, you're telling me it's right. It's not. It's not. And that is Chabad. Chabad appreciates the difference between sheker and emes. Without that, it's down to Gehenna or Gan Eden. If you look at all the things that were said about Bubby, Bubby was a Chabad chassid. She wasn't impressed with good and bad. She wasn't impressed with good, and she wasn't intimidated by bad. Her issue was right or wrong, emes or sheker. If it's emes, it's everything, and if it's sheker, it's nothing. So what makes the Nefesh HaBahamis sheker? Everything the Nefesh HaBahamis says is fake? It's a lie? The non-kosher candy doesn't taste good? What does Nefesh HaBahamis say? It tastes good, you'll enjoy it. Well, that's not true. It's not that it's a lie. It's that it has nothing to do with emes. The method of the Nefesh HaBahamis doesn't take emes into consideration. It makes believe that emes is not important. What's important is, does it taste good? Like the argument, how could it be bad? It tastes so good. So when your motivation is not emes, then you're sheker. If emes is not important to you, then you're fake. Not unreal. The taiva is real, the candy is real, the benefits of working on Shabbos, you make a lot of money. That's all real. The fake or the sheker is, because you make money, therefore it's okay. So imagine a person closes his store on Shabbos. Why? Because for some reason, nobody comes shopping on Shabbos. So now is he a good person? It's sheker. If you're doing mitzvahs, you're learning Torah, you're behaving yourself, you're frum to the nth degree because you want to go to Gan Eden. What do you call that? Sheker. And that's where the question comes from. If there is no Gehenna, and if you're not going to suffer, why would anybody do what the Eibishter asks? What's wrong with that attitude? What's wrong with it is, it's totally missing emes. Emes is not even part of the equation. Did the Eibishter say not to do this? Does the Eibishter want you to not do this? That's not, that's not a consideration. Will I go to Gehenna or not? So what if you refrain from doing the Aveda because you don't want to go to Gehenna? Not good enough. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, you can have a neshama sitting in Gan Eden for 500 years, and he has absolutely no shaykhs to Elokus. That's really scary. That even when you get to Gan Eden, you can sit there and enjoy learning in Yeshiva Shalmaila, and it's the same as what you were doing here on earth. You're doing it out of a reason, out of a personal benefit, still not emes. When a person says, I'm doing it for my personal benefit, we object to that because it's selfish. Oh, you're being selfish. That's true. He's being selfish. But worse than that, when you're being selfish, you don't care whether it's emes or not. You've lost sight of what is emes. So all your motivation is lacking emes, so it's sheker. You don't care about the emes. So if you don't care about the emes, you can't care about somebody else unless it benefits you. So there's the problem. If you're convinced that the Eibishter doesn't really want your mitzvah, what are you left with? So what's emes? Emes is that if you keep the mitzvahs, you'll go to Gan Eden. That's emes. So what is Mashiach? Why is Chabad necessarily a Hagdama or a Hachana for Mashiach. It's because the resolution, the end of the fight between good and bad can only come through Chabad. In Midas, good and bad will never be resolved. Good will always be good, bad will always be bad. So how is the world going to come to a place of shalom, a place of completion, even practical peace? It'll never happen. The only way to resolve it is through emes. If people focus on emes, then good and bad stop being an issue. So practically speaking, should the police be dismantled? There should not be a police force. Because you give people that kind of authority and you give them weapons, somebody's going to get hurt. Incorrectly. No question about it. If you have a death penalty, someplace, somewhere, the wrong person is going to get killed. No question about it. We're talking fallible human beings. So the solution is, don't give anybody that kind of authority. So what's going to happen? People will take care of it themselves. Right. Actually, that is right. The only way that there's going to be civilization is when people behave themselves and don't commit crimes because that's what the Eibishter wants. If the average person is walking around with that awareness, the Eibishter says no, and therefore you don't do it, then you really don't need police with guns. But if you don't have that, and that's what the Rebbe was screaming about prayer in public school or the moment of silence in public school. If you don't tell people that the Eibishter said no, there's no end to the crime. There'll be no end to it. Either the crime of the citizens or the crime of the government, or both. So the only solution to today's problem is a moment of silence. Like the Rebbe said, a moment of silence to stop and think that there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears. So now, what if you know that there is an eye that sees and an ear that hears, but that eye and that ear doesn't care? You're back to zero. That's where we've gotten ourselves into trouble. So why should every Chabad house tell people, what are we? What is our message? Well, we are Chabad. And Chabad says that emes is important. It's the only thing that's important. And the emes is that this is the Eibishter's world. He invented it. He created it. He designed it. He desired it. It's all his. He's not here to take care of us, and he's not doing us a favor. Nobody else is going to tell you that, because without Chabad, im ein das havdalah minayin. Anyway, that was pretty heavy. Let me get back. I just finished talking to that program, Learning for Razel. You know what that is? Mrs. Zucker, who passed away. And she's a Muchkin. So I told the story, which you probably heard already. But a while ago, I got a phone call from a woman from Montreal. She's a Satmar Chussid. Her father was a big Satmar Rov Dayan in Montreal. But she has fallen in love with Chassidus, and she teaches in the girls' school, the Satmar girls' school. So she smuggles in as much of Chassidus that she can, but she has to hide it, because if they recognize it, they'll fire her. So she calls me because she wants to introduce the idea of bittul, but she can't use that word because it's not part of their vocabulary. So she's trying to figure out how to explain bittul without using the word bittul. So we spoke about it a little bit. And then she says, you want to know how I got involved with Chassidus? She says, my father passed away. And one night, he came to me in my dream. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the dream, he said to me, I'm sorry, I have to leave, I have to go. Ältere Chassidim are Farbrengen, I have to go to the Farbrengen. She had never heard that language, certainly not from her father. Ältere Chassidim, Farbrengen, was ist das? So she said, what are you talking about? Her father said to her in the dream, that Peretz Mochkin is leading a Farbrengen, I have to go. She didn't know who Peretz Mochkin was. She heard his name for the first time. Peretz Mochkin was the mashpia of Anash in Montreal. So after that, she decided, you got to look into this. My father is going to a Farbrengen by a Lubavitcher Chassid mashpia. So she started learning, and she says, this is like oxygen. Chassidus that she's learning is like oxygen. She never knew before that she wasn't breathing. She was oxygen starved. So when she told me that story, I said to her, now let me tell you my story. It's so interesting that you called me. Of all the people you could have called, why'd you call me? It's because my grandfather, when he came to Tashkent, was a stranger, a foreigner, and people in that time were extremely suspicious. They couldn't trust anybody. The communists were so evil, they would call somebody into their office. Like imagine your cousin, your favorite, closest cousin is called by the KGB to come to their office. He comes back 2 hours later. You can't talk to him. Why? Because it's very possible that they threatened to kill his children unless he reported your activities to them. Now, what is he supposed to do? So the first week he comes back and he says, I didn't see anything, nothing. I have nothing to report. Come back next week, you better have something to report. Now he's been there twice. Nobody trusts him anymore. Maybe he was threatened. Now he's going to report you to save his own kids. The truth is, he didn't tell him anything, and he's not going to tell him anything. He's as loyal to you as he ever was, but how do you know? So they didn't have to do anything to you, just invite you to the office, and that's it. Nobody trusts you. They certainly didn't trust a stranger. Only the Peretz, a Peretz Mochkin, who was there in Tashkent, he noticed that the Zayde, the elder Zayde, was for real. And he trusted him. What did he notice? That he wears a woolen talus cotton, even at night. The weather in Tashkent was unbearably hot. If you wore a woolen talus cotton when you were sleeping, you were the real thing. So not only did he trust him, he was mekad of him. He went and borrowed money probably, and bought a knitting machine for the Zayde so that he can make a living without having to work for a company that would demand that he come in on Shabbos. So he had a knitting machine, he knit socks. And then they would sell the socks, and that's how they survived. So of course, the Elter Zayde had no idea how to run a machine. So my father, your Zayde, ran the machine. So instead of being untrusted strangers, they became part of the Chabad community. So much so that when Zayde decided to marry Bubby, and Bubby was not from Anash, they were jealous. They wanted him to marry someone from Anash. So it's interesting that this woman, the teacher in the Satmar school, her introduction to Chassidus came from Peretz Mochkin about 50 years after my Zayde was turned on to Chassidus by a Peretz Mochkin.